on the roof of the AGR building because you were worried about safety because of the slope?
I recall that statement.
Okay. Does the Secret Service have written policy you can share with us about slope roofs?
No.
Okay. So why'd you act like there was one? Because is it your practice to comment on enormous events of enormous national implications when you're ignorant of the facts? That's rhetorical. So here's this thing with the slopes. You go all up to like 1812, you can go to a 112, which is about as flat as you can get without it being completely flat. And you're saying that there was a danger, safety concern there, but the problem is, Director, you put your counter snipers on a 312 roof, which is steeper than the 112. And by the way, the 112 is ADA compliant. You can build a ramp for a wheelchair on a 112 roof. So these are nothing but pathetic excuses, and they make no sense, and they're a bunch of cow dung. All the law enforcement I've spoken with over the last 9 days are amazed that the AGR rooftop was not secure. And you want to know why? Because it's dangerous. I have never had any long gun training in my life. I own an AR-15, and last time I shot it one time my whole life. It was 6 years ago. That is until Saturday, where we recreated the events in Savoy, Texas, where we recreated what happened in Butler. I was lying prone on a sloped roof at 130 yards at 6:30 at night. And I knew that he had a scope, I didn't know what kind, red dot or magnified. So I shot 8 rounds from both. You know what the result was? 15 out of 16 kill shots. And the one I missed would have hit the president's ear. That's a 94% success rate. And that shooter was a better shot than me. It is a miracle President Trump wasn't killed. Corey Campeatore's life is over because that damn shooter made it on the roof. And it wasn't the roof that was dangerous, it was a nut job on top of the roof. You know what else is dangerous? I believe your horrifying ineptitude and your lack of skilled leadership is a disgrace. Your obfuscating today is shameful. And you should be fired immediately and go back to Garden Doritos. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the chair, the ranking member, for coming together and holding this hearing. But I have to say, I don't think any of our concerns have been addressed today, and what little we've learned has not inspired much confidence. I will just say that we obviously can't allow the violence we're seeing in this country become the norm or a commonplace, but that seems to be where we're heading. On this occasion, it was, very shockingly, a former president and current political candidate at a rally that we all assume is one of the most secure places we can be. But the violence we saw last Saturday is the same culture of violence that makes too many of our kids and our community members feel unsafe to play outside or to go to class or to simply live their lives each day. But again, this was a political rally, and it is supposed to be one of the most secure places. So we do have very specific questions about that. Director Cheeto, I'd like to start by following up on some of my colleagues' questions. My colleagues, Mr. Krishnamurthy and Mr. Frost, highlighted a number of points that showed the shooter presenting an active threat. So I'd like to ask you, Director Cheeto, to clarify what the protocol is for postponing or canceling an event based on a threat, and how the events on July 13th didn't meet those standards.
So again, I think we're talking about the distinction between suspicious behavior and a threat. And at the time that this individual was identified, they were displaying suspicious behavior. I'm still waiting for interviews from the FBI to determine what it was that identified that individual as suspicious and what those behaviors were.
To that question, does suspicious behavior vary between different events? For instance, if we have an event with a president, would there not be a heightened standard for suspicious behavior?
I think that there are a number of ways that someone could be identified as suspicious, and it doesn't matter whether it's at a rally or an indoor event or who the protectee is. I think it's up to law enforcement or citizens to identify someone as suspicious.
Okay, thank you. According to the Associated Press, at least 6 different agencies, including 2 sheriff's office, local police, state police, as well as fire and emergency rescue officials were involved in securing the rally in Butler. When there are so many teams that are collaborating, who takes the lead and how is that determined?
The Secret Service is responsible for the security of the site and the coordination.
And that was the case on July 13th?
Correct.
Okay. Changing gears, in 2024's appropriations budget, the Secret Service was given a little over $3 billion, which was about $78 million above what was requested. For 2025's budget, you've requested yet another increase. How much of these funds goes towards training and improving protection procedures?
I would have to get back to you on the training aspect of it, but about 30% of our budget is for protection and facilities and training.
But clearly the problem can't be a lack of funding. So what exactly do you see as the core problem that led to this failure, that led to your agency being outgunned by a 20-year-old using his father's gun and acting on his own without a particularly sophisticated plan or technology?
I think that we are waiting to determine exactly what those failures or failure was so that we can make sure that the Secret Service is stronger after this.
So we've heard a lot today that you can't answer because it's an ongoing investigation, that you're still figuring out the details, and that you won't answer basic questions. You've said 60 days for the investigation, but I simply don't think that's acceptable. Do you really plan to keep avoiding questions and the American people's questions, ours and the American people's questions, for the next 60 days?
I'm not avoiding questions. I want to make sure that I am providing factual and accurate information.
Certainly, but is there no in-between, right, between what is obviously a fact and what you can surmise from the details that you already have?
I assure you, when I have a full and complete report of what took place on that day, I will certainly come back and make that available.
Certainly. Studies indicate that the United States is experiencing increasing levels of political violence and tension. Does the Secret Service see increasing political violence as a threat to its work? And if so, how is the Secret Service adapting its strategies and protocols to account for increasing political violence?
We are constantly evaluating the threats that we receive and monitoring that, and we make adjustments on a daily basis to our protectees based on what those threats are and what actions we need to take.
Yes or no? Do you believe that stricter controls on the availability of assault weapons would make it easier for the Secret Service to fulfill its missions of protecting public officials?
I think the Secret Service is tasked with providing a safe environment, which is why we put into place a number of mitigation factors.
Certainly, but do assault weapons make it easier or harder for you to do your job?
I think that any weapon makes it difficult for us to do our job.
Okay, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Donalds from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, real quick, at what time was Secret Service aware of the active threat against President Trump? Director, what time?
So the Secret Service was aware that there was an individual who had been identified as suspicious, and that individual was attempting to be tracked down.
At what time?
I don't have a specific timeline other than to tell
Director,
you,
it's been 9 days.
I understand
At what
that.
time?
I want to make sure that I give you factual information, sir.
Director, have you talked to the agents on the ground that day?
Yes, I have.
You've talked to all of them? Mm-hmm. Your senior team has talked to every agent that was on the ground that day?
Yes, we have.
Have they all corroborated the same time they identified the shooter or they were made aware of the shooter, either by attendees in the crowd or a local police department?
There are a number of reports of when those times were made.
Was it 5 minutes before the first shot rang out?
No.
Generally speaking, was it 10 minutes before the first shot rang out?
No.
Was it 15 minutes before the first shot rang out?
It was less than that time frame when it was identified as a threat.
How many days before the shooting took place did Secret Service actually do their advance work to secure the facility that the rally was going to be held at?
5 days.
In the 5 days prior, when the security advance team did their work, did they identify the rooftop as a potential threat?
Again, I'm pulling those reports and that information.
It's been 9
to
days,
conduct those
Madam Director.
interviews.
Did they notice a rooftop 150 yards away that was a potential threat? Yes or no?
I am certain that the rooftop was noticed. I am pulling the reports.
What was the security parameters around securing that rooftop? What did they do?
There was overwatch provided for that rooftop.
Did Overwatch fail?
I am waiting to hear what the results of the investigation were so that I can identify where the failure was.
Who did you talk to that was on the ground that day that was responsible for Overwatch? What are their names?
I'm not going to provide their names in this setting.
Did you talk to the people that were providing Overwatch that day?
I've talked to the people that conducted the advance on that day and that were working the shift and were the counter snipers on that day.
So you talked to the counter sniper team, you talked to the people who were providing Overwatch that day, and you talked to the advance team, correct?
Yes, sir.
What did they tell you?
We are putting together a comprehensive report so that I can identify exactly where the gaps and the failures.
When the counter sniper team was on the roof and they identified that there was suspicious activity on the roof in question, what was the chain of command's orders around the person on said roof? Because I'm quite sure somebody saw under your organization, the Secret Service, I'm quite sure somebody saw the shooter on the roof. So what was the communication through the chain of command to deal with said person?
What I can tell you is that when the individual was identified by the counter sniper, they took one shot and neutralized that individual.
But that was after the shooter already took a shot, is that correct?
That is correct.
So what you're saying now is that the Secret Service did not see the shooter on the roof until after the shooter took a shot?
I do not have all of those details at this time.
If you don't have those details after 9 days, Director, then what you're telling me is that you guys didn't see it. Is that correct?
I am telling you I don't have all the details of the sequence at this time.
Director, it's been 9 days. Either you have the information or you do not. Is that correct?
We are still in the process of conducting interviews and an investigation.
Some of my colleagues have texted me over the last couple days, bipartisan, about whether you should lose your job. And I've been quiet on that question because I wanted to see what you were going to do today. In my opinion, you do need to be fired immediately. And it is because this is gross incompetence. And the fact that it's been 9 days, and these are simple questions to answer, I'm quite sure if I asked any one of my kids if they got in trouble and I told them to give me the details, I would get more answers from them than I'm getting from you right now. And that's what's frustrating on a bipartisan basis, on a nonpartisan basis. This is a joke. And Director, you're in charge, and that's why you need to go. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Goldman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I want to follow up and just understand a little bit why there is so much information about this out in the public, including some from you and your communications team, and yet you're here pursuant to a subpoena under oath in front of Congress, and you're unable or unwilling to answer some of those same questions. Can you just explain why you are answering so many fewer questions here than you have to the media?
I'm answering the questions that I'm able to answer based on the fact that there are multiple ongoing investigations.
But you have answered some of these questions previously, correct? To the public, to the media.
Which questions?
Well, did you have an interview with ABC News?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you explain the interaction between local law enforcement and the Secret Service, and that local law enforcement was responsible for securing the perimeter of the building where the shooter was?
I said that the Secret Service is responsible for designing and implementing and executing the security plan, and that we rely on the assistance of our local law enforcement partners to assist us with that plan.
Let me ask you something. Were you given any instructions about what you can and cannot answer here today?
My ability to answer questions is solely reflective of the fact that there are multiple ongoing investigations, and I want to make sure that I provide accurate information that doesn't conflict with any of those investigations that are going on.
So is it your view that you can't talk about anything that happened that day until those investigations are completed?
My view is that I want to make sure that this committee and the American public gets correct and actual information.
And so is it your view that that can only happen after the completion of the investigation?
It is my view that when the investigations are complete, that we will be able to share that information.
And how about before that?
If I have factual information that I can share before that, I absolutely will.
I'm guessing you have factual information as to when the suspicious photograph of the suspicious person was relayed to the Secret Service. There's a timestamp on that text message or whatever it was, correct?
Sir, I'm sure you can understand that when you're dealing with text messages, emails, and other communications, the timelines don't always match up.
Not really if they're time-stamped, but let me move on. Because you have acknowledged that this was a major security failure. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you acknowledge that it was a major security failure not to secure the rooftop of the building that the shooter shot from?
I believe at this time that the rooftop was provided Overwatch. I acknowledge that we are unaware at this time how the individual was able to access the roof.
Overwatch meaning from other counter sniper, other higher points?
Correct.
And so was it a failure then that when that shooter was on the rooftop that Overwatch did not identify him before he fired his shots?
I don't have the timeline of how the individual accessed the roof, where they accessed the roof, or how long they were on the roof.
Let me ask a couple things quickly. You have testified here about all the resources that the Secret Service needed to deploy to protect the NATO summit and all of the leaders here. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you have to rely more on local law enforcement because of the NATO summit for this event?
The Secret Service routinely works with local law enforcement at every event. It doesn't matter whether it is a NATO summit, NSSE, the RNC in
No, but that's not my
Milwaukee.
question. Obviously, there's a natural give and take as to, I'm sure, how many agents you deploy and how much you rely on local law enforcement. Did you have to rely more on local law enforcement because there were fewer Secret Service assets available because of the NATO summit?
No.
I hope we get answers before the completion. I don't like the fact that the media has received far more answers than Congress has. If this is a function of getting your ducks in a row, I assume you have access to a lot of these reports and a lot of this information, and you should have come prepared here today. And I would just want to flag, Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, that I want to just point out one thing that my colleague from Texas was talking about. When he said he recreated this shooting twice with an AR-15, and he had a 94% success rate, 15 out of 16 shots. I don't know why that doesn't convince him that we should get rid of AR-15s, but clearly we need to do something about the prevalence of AR-15s and weapons of war on our streets. And I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, I guess 60 days is the time of the investigation. Is that the information that you've put out, or where did that come from, 60 days? Or is that just information that the committee members are talking about?
I stated that earlier today. I've asked
Okay,
my
60
team.
days. So are you receiving regular updates? You're in charge of the Secret Service. This is about your organization, what happened 9 days ago. Are you receiving regular updates from the FBI on their investigation?
Yes, I am.
So you know some things are true, some things are probably not true. We want to talk to you about the things that we're hearing about and find out if they're true. You've been in contact with the FBI, then you're getting updates on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
Based on what you said. Okay, so, and are you confident that the person in question, Mr. Crooks, was the only person firing that day against the president or the crowd? Is he the only one? I'm not asking you yet if he acted alone, but is he the only one? Or can you say that with certainty to the American people?
That is the information I have at this time, yes.
Okay, does it appear he acted alone?
That's the information we have at this time.
Okay, now let's talk about the fact that he was noticed as a person of interest, of concern, suspicion, as you say. Your PI team, how do they stay in, there's a sea of people. How does the PI team get to that individual that's in question in the sea of people? How's that individual tracked?
Our protective intelligence teams that work at our sites are paired up with a local police counterpart, and so they work in conjunction together.
So they just follow them around, or let me ask you this. Looking at the site, you have multiple perimeters, right? You have the secure perimeter, the inside perimeter, you have multiple perimeters. Was the AGR so-called building the highest location affecting the site of the rally? Was it the highest location?
I believe the highest location at the site was where our counter snipers were.
What about the water
positioned.
tower adjacent? What about how high is the water tower?
I don't have the height on the water tower.
Okay, seems like water towers are pretty high, at least in the photo. It looks like there might actually be a building right behind the AGR building that is even higher than the building that Crooks fired from. You're familiar with cover, concealment, and defilade, right? You're familiar with those terms?
Yes.
So how would your sniper team or your PI team track the individual and give vectors to Secret Service on the PI team to get to that individual to question him? And how would you cover the defilade, the cover and concealment of low areas that you can't see from where your sniper team immediately adjacent to the president were sighted? How would you do that if you're not up on the high ground?
So when our counter sniper teams go out and conduct an advance, they have a methodology and provide a grid system that our response teams are able to vector in if they see something that is troubling.
So when Mr. Jordan asked about the assets that were requested, let me just ask you about assets requested. Were aerial assets requested for this event from either the Secret Service or state police or anybody else, drone, manned, otherwise? Aerial assets, were they requested?
I can't speak to what the local
just asking
police
if they were
may
requested.
have conversations with the local police, but I can tell you that the assets that were requested from the Secret Service for the site that day were all granted.
But were aerial assets requested? I didn't ask if you used them or what you used. Were they requested?
Overwatch was requested and
aerial.
was provided.
Is that aerial? Because Overwatch could mean on the water tower or not on the water tower. Can you be specific, ma'am? I'm running out of daylight here.
I understand. If you're asking me about specifics, whether or not there was...
Is it not clear what I'm asking you? Were aerial assets requested by the president, by Secret Service, by anybody? Were they requested?
The Secret Service, we felt that we had a good plan in place.
Okay, fair enough. How about K-9 assets with bomb sniffing or explosive sniffing capabilities? Requested. I didn't say they were present. Were they requested?
Those requests were fulfilled.
They were requested and fulfilled. Mm-hmm. So was the Crooks vehicle inside any of your perimeters?
No, it was not.
It was not. How did you... So it was not within the, so what, was there a device located on Mr. Crook's body to detonate the vehicle?
That is the information that I have.
So what would be the point of detonating the vehicle if it was not inside the perimeter?
I have no idea what Mr. Crook's motivation was.
Ma'am, the fact that you haven't, I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman, haven't even visited the site. I understand there are other things going on, but the culture of your organization, the culture, that doesn't, do you know how tall the president is? How tall is the president? President Trump, how tall is he?
He's over 6 feet tall. I don't know.
Okay, so do you assign agents based on their ability to cover physically and carry, if necessary, the President of the United States when you assign them to this mission? Is that a parameter that is considered?
I assign agents to work our protectees that are capable and have been trained by the Secret Service.
I understand they're trained, but if you're not tall enough, it has nothing to do with, we're not mad at you, but if somebody's 7 feet tall and you're 5 feet tall, there's going to be a delta there that is problematic in protecting the protectee. And I'm asking, is that a consideration when these agents, not saying you, but when they're assigned to the protectee?
The agents that are assigned to our protectees are perfectly capable.
Okay, ma'am. So the culture is what I'm
protection.
concerned about, because the primary objective here seems to be something other than securing the site, securing the principal, and securing the people at the site. And that's the concern based on the answers that you've given today so far. Without a yield, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes.
Assigned to our protectees are perfectly capable.
Okay, ma'am. So
of
the
providing
culture is what I'm
protection.
concerned about, because the primary objective here seems to be something other than securing the site, securing the principal, and securing the people at the site. And that's the concern based on the answers that you've given today so far. Without a yield, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Moskowitz from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. I want to thank the subpoena that you sent. I want to thank Ranking Member Raskin and your work, the letter you sent to the committee. And I also support the creation of a commission to get to the bottom of what happened. Director, I just want to give you an honest assessment of how this is going for you today. Did you happen to catch the hearing many months ago in education where there were a bunch of university presidents, and Elise Stefanik asked a very easy question and couldn't get an answer? Did you see that hearing?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, well, let me tell you, it didn't go well, and the short end of that story was those university professors all resigned. They're gone. That's how this is going for you. This is where this is headed, okay? This is, I don't know who prepared you for this. I don't know how many times you've testified in front of Congress, but a president was almost assassinated live on television, not just for Americans, but for the world to see. And this being your first opportunity, I understand there's an ongoing investigation. I understand there's things that you can not talk about. But the idea that we're getting less than you did on television is something that Democrats, Independents, or Republicans are going to find unacceptable. My high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, was on the list of mass shootings that Representative Raskin held up. That very day, the school resource officer, a police officer, did not run into the building. He hid in the stairwell while the shooter was in the building. He stayed outside, never helped. Okay. He also directed other officers who showed up on the scene not to go into the building. When it was determined that the failures in response and training, and that the sheriff fired nobody in his agency, Governor DeSantis then removed that sheriff. I supported the removal. So here's my question. You said there's going to be accountability. I understand you don't want to give us names. When you say that, are you telling the committee that once it's concluded, you're prepared to fire the people on the ground who made poor decisions that day?
I'm prepared to take the actions necessary.
No, that's nonsense. Okay. Accountability. The failure was human. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It means they failed that day, and a former president was almost assassinated. Okay. Are you prepared to fire the human failure on the ground? Yes or no? When you have the names of where those failures were, they're people. It's not like a piece of technology failed. It was people who failed that day. Are you prepared to fire them?
I don't have an answer as to whether.
Well, then how can there be accountability if you're not prepared to fire someone? And the reason why your name is going to be the person who's held accountable, the reason why members in this committee are calling for resignation, and I join in that, or for the president to fire you, is because you're saying there's going to be accountability, but you can't commit that people are going to get fired. Let me ask this question a different way. If Trump had been assassinated that day, if the gunman had succeeded, okay, would you have come and tendered your resignation?
I would still be sitting here because I would want to ensure the integrity of the investigation.
Totally understand. That's a fair answer, that you would have set up that process. But would you have had the honor to come in front of the committee and say, former president was assassinated on my watch, there should be new leadership?
I think that I have admitted that there was.
No, that's what I'm asking. Would you have tendered your resignation if he had been killed?
That occurred on my watch, and I am accountable for that.
Okay, but would you have tendered your resignation if he had been killed?
I think that I've admitted that I've taken accountability and will take responsibility.
Okay. Well, let me ask I want to follow up on Representative Connolly's question, in which he asked about guns, and you were not willing to commit that makes your job harder. This is not about the Second Amendment. If there were over 400 million guns on the streets, if all of those guns were machine guns, would that make your job harder to protect people?
Again, I think weapons that are out there.
If all of those guns were rocket-propelled grenades, would that make your job harder?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay, thank you, perfect. This is not a trick question. Thank you, okay. I won't ask the other 15 things I was gonna do. I was gonna do drone strikes, but it's okay. So, that's all we were asking. It creates a challenging environment. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment or people's rights, but it does make your job harder. So credit to Representative Connolly for asking that question. One last thing, Mr. Chairman, and I'll conclude. You know, there was a question asked, is an Iranian assassin more capable than a 20-year-old? And I have been tough on Iran. I probably have more resolutions on Iran than almost anyone in Congress. But I can tell you it isn't Iranians walking into schools and grocery stores and movie theaters and churches. It is 20-year-olds, right? And some of them are mentally unstable. And they have access to guns. And they're domestic terrorists. Someone talked about Christopher Wray. Christopher Wray has talked about domestic terrorism. And so, yes, we collectively come together on foreign threats, and I am not at all debasing the fact that there are foreign threats here and abroad, but there are domestic threats, and we have to get to the bottom of how we stop domestic terrorism, because it was a 20-year-old who walked into my high school and killed 17 people. He was plenty capable, and he was an Iranian. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Cheadle, we've asked you a lot of questions and haven't really got a lot of straight answers. I have intentionally created a line of questioning that I think that you can answer. So the first question is, do you agree that the allocation of Secret Service resources should correspond with the risk profile of any given event? A higher degree of risk at one event should get more resources. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay. And when two events occur at the same time in the same geographic vicinity, that the risk profile of each event should be taken into account, and whichever event is greater risk should receive greater resources.
That is correct.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the Trump event. So this was publicly announced July 3rd, Butler, Pennsylvania. The venue is an outdoor fairground, open air, no existing security. The crowd size was expected to be tens of thousands. It ended up being over 20,000. There were general and specific threats from foreign adversaries. As the chairman of intelligence remarked, Iran has said they want revenge, as well as when President Trump was in office, he made a lot of people mad, terrorists to be included all over the world. And, you know, President Trump is the former president and the future president. So I would say that that is a fairly high-risk event. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, let's conversely, the First Lady had an event at a casino in Pittsburgh, just a few dozen miles away. It was a dinner for the Italian Sons and Daughters of America. It was publicly announced on July 10th. What's interesting is that the casino is actually extremely secure. They already have magnetometers existing prior to this event even being announced. It was in a ballroom. And the size of the crowd, a mere 400. There were no specific threats. There may have been general threats. And the asset is the First Lady. Those seem like there's a huge disparity relative to risk. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Multiple whistleblowers and various media outlets have reported that the Pittsburgh field office of the Secret Service allocated 12 additional post standers to the First Lady's event and 3 additional post standers to the Trump rally. Is that correct?
There were no assets that were diverted from the First Lady's
No. This is a very
visits.
simple question. I'm not asking if anyone was diverted. Did the First Lady's event that was relatively secure, especially compared to Trump's rally, get 12 assets? And did the First Lady's event get 12 assets and Trump's get 3 from the Pittsburgh field office? That's a yes or no question. If you don't know, don't answer it. I mean, if you don't know, don't
The
answer
number of personnel that were allocated to both of those events were comparable to the risk at both of those events.
Wow. Really? So you think that the Pittsburgh casino, 400-person in a ballroom with ingress, egress through probably a very well-guarded parking garage was 4 times more dangerous than a 20,000-person rally in an open field with the former president and future president? You think that that's 4 times more dangerous, the casino event?
I didn't say that at all.
Well, they got 4 times the resources from the Pittsburgh field office, who was likely in charge of the final walkthrough for both events. I mean, we've continually highlighted the failures of the Secret Service at the Trump rally. And, you know, you have the former and future president getting shot. You have multiple injuries, one fatality. And I would have to think that if we had 9 more post standards, 9 more individuals that have the training and the integration into the Secret Service defense of Trump at that rally, that I have a feeling that Crooks would have had somebody come say hello to him before he fired a bunch of shots. Do you think that's possibly true?
There were significantly more assets and resources available at the former president's event than there were at the first.
Who made the decision to deploy 12 post standards to the casino where the First Lady was having a 400-person dinner, and only 3 people from the Pittsburgh field office to the 20,000-person plus Trump rally? Who made that decision?
There were additional Secret Service resources available at the former President Trump's event.
Who made the decision to deploy 12 to the First Lady's event and 3 to the Trump event?
The allocation of resources is decided based on the availability of personnel and their location and where they are, but there were sufficient resources
What did you just
that
say?
were given to
Did you just say there were
former
sufficient
presidents.
resources? President Trump
Event
got
that
shot.
day.
Someone got killed. There were not sufficient resources, clearly.
There was
and
a
it doesn't take 27 years of experience to know that. And whoever made that decision, it probably wasn't you, needs to be fired. And then you need to resign because this is absolutely unacceptable and you've lost the trust of the American people. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Tlaib from Michigan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here. You know, when we hear the headline, a 20-year-old young man with access to an assault weapon commits an act of mass violence, I mean, we've heard this before, over and over again. But the unfortunate thing is that my residents don't get a committee hearing. We have not had one committee hearing about the over 260 mass shootings that we've had, killing hundreds of people, injuring hundreds, changing their lives forever. And don't get me wrong, to many of my colleagues, I mean, I watched, and even the pool of blood, the screams, it was horrific. But it made me think about the images I saw after mass shootings at schools, grocery stores. I mean, I think of Buffalo, New York at a supermarket where a racist gunman killed 10 shoppers with an AR. In El Paso, AK-47 style assault rifle killed 22. In Florida, in Parkland, Florida, 17 students and teachers murdered, again with an AR. In Pittsburgh, at a place of faith, Tree of Life Synagogue, 11 murdered. And don't get me about Newton, Connecticut, which still breaks my heart. 26 murdered, including 20 elementary school children. This year in Michigan, we've had, Mr. Chair, 2 mass shootings. 21 shot in Detroit. One of the most horrific shootings we've seen. 2 killed at a splash pad in Rochester Hills, Michigan. 8 shot there. Again, an assault weapon used. But the difference here is the former president gets a hearing in his attempt to assassinate, but our residents don't get a hearing about mass shootings, about gun violence in our country. You know, Mr. Chair, I ask this wholeheartedly. You know, they don't have Secret Service to protect them. They don't. I don't have these mass agencies protecting our kids in the schools or the supermarket, movie theaters, or going to a block party in Detroit. I don't have that. We don't have that. But I can't believe we're just going to focus on that and not the fact that we're hearing yet again in the headlines a 20-year-old young man having access to an assault weapon, a weapon of war many of my veterans say they have to be trained to use. But he can get it, wasn't safely stored by the parent, grabbing that gun, and innocent lives were lost. Director, I know you got asked about this, and I think it's important, though, you know, for us to hear this. But how difficult is your job when there's such easy access to assault weapons in the streets?
I think the job of a Secret Service agent and officer is incredibly difficult. I think the environment we deal with every day and the dynamics of the threat environment is incredibly difficult. These are brave men and women who put their lives on the line, and a day like we had on July 13th is a day that no one in my agency ever wants to have as their responsibility. It is an incredibly difficult job.
Yeah, I immediately thought of the children in the audience. I mean, when you think about going to a rally with your family, again, their lives are forever changed. The incident are never isolated. I really believe these incidents are never isolated. And I know Detroit Free Press had reported that the 20-year-old Pennsylvania shooter looked up the 2021 Oxford High School shooting in Michigan. Can you comment on what information this shooter was looking up in regarding the tragedy of Oxford High School, where it took 4 of our high school youth there?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to. The FBI has those details.
So you can't even tell us, I mean, was he looking at the type of weapon? How many?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have those details.
Do you have, I mean, did they share that with you, though?
I don't have the full content of what his searches were. I think that they are still in the process of examining all of his devices.
Okay. Again, you know, the impact, I want to be really serious about this. The impact on our families is more than just this political rally, Mr. Chair. We have to talk about this, even if we're in disagreement. Let's talk about it, because I've seen statistics that show that we could be saving lives now if we ban these weapons of war from being able to buy it at the local store down the street. I mean, we just can't continue to allow this to happen. And unfortunately, my residents are not former presidents of the United States. They don't get a hearing. They don't get Secret Service, any of that. And even among those that are expressing the failed in the system, they just deserve better. They truly do. Thank you, and I yield.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cheadle, the shooter was set up on the roof of the AGR International building, as we know. Was the roof identified as a potential vulnerability days before the rally?
To my knowledge, yes, it was.
Were agents or officers inside the building? If so, what floor were they on?
We had local police officers inside the building.
The roof looks like it's a tin roof. How did no one inside that building hear someone moving on top of a metal roof?
I don't have the details of all of the interviews that have been conducted yet.
When will you have those?
I have been asking, and I want to have that information as soon as you do as
Okay.
well.
Why did Secret Service fail to block the line of sight from that roof?
I think that the Secret Service put together a plan where they were counting that roof in as part of their overwatch, and that was the plan that they had put in place that day.
If you weren't going to put a security personnel on the roof, why not at least use drone technology or aerial surveillance to monitor the rally?
There are a number of times that we do use drone technology. I'm not speaking specifically to this event and what was utilized or not. There are times when drone technology is available and helpful at events, and there are times when it is not appropriate.
Do y'all use Signal? Do you personally use Signal to communicate with any official from the White House? Signal on your phone?
Oh, on occasion, I'm sure that there are people that use Signal, yes.
Okay. Do you use it to speak with the White House? Use Signal?
No, I do not.
Okay. When was Thomas Crooks first identified as a person of interest? Let me help you. At 5:10, he was spotted with a rangefinder at 5:51. And when did Secret Service notice him?
Again, I don't have those specific timelines, but it was a relatively short period of time.
Let me help you. 5:52. Ms. Cheadle, why was President Trump allowed on stage 10 minutes after the Secret Service spotted a suspicious individual? That seems to me to be the worst thing of all. Of all the breakdown and all this communication, all the BS you've been feeding us here today or not feeding us, that seems to be the question.
So as I've stated before, there are a number of events where suspicious people may be identified. That doesn't necessarily...
Ma'am, I submit to you, you got a guy who's going to be the next president of the United States. He's on stage. I've been to these events. We've all been to these events. A car backfires, and there's a 15-minute dadgum wait. That's not acceptable. Did the Secret Service tell President Trump they'd spotted a suspicious individual before he was shot?
I am unclear as to what the communication was with the former president at that time.
I'll take that as a no. Did y'all deny President Trump's request for more security, yes or no? And when was the most recent request for additional security?
The rally request for security, all of those requests were fulfilled.
And were there any personnel redirected to Jill Biden's rally?
No.
Who made the decision on the direction of agents at either one of those rallies?
I'm unclear as to your question on the direction of the agents.
I said, who directed those agents to be at Ms. Biden's rally or President Trump's rally? The specific agents.
So there is a methodology in which agents are available for assignments, and they are assigned based on either geographic location or logistics or flight.
Ma'am, I appreciate all that, but that methodology about got President Trump killed. Was the security detail guarding President Trump a temporary detail?
The personnel who are assigned to the former president's detail are assigned to him.
Why was there a different detail on the opening night of the convention than the detail that was guarding him in Pennsylvania?
The president has a very large permanent protective detail assigned to him. They work shift work, and so it could be that people you saw at the rally were not working the same shift the day that he was.
I can assure you, ma'am, somebody that's a lot shorter than the president was not at the convention, and the people that were cowering down behind the mass of agents that were on top of the president were not in the convention hall. At least I didn't see them. You can't seem to answer a single question about an ongoing investigation, ma'am, and you don't know when the information will be released publicly. Are you waiting for the administration to sign off?
No, I am waiting for the results of the investigation, at which time.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question. You found explosives in the shooter's possession. Is that correct?
The FBI found explosives.
Do we know who directed this young man how to make those explosives?
I believe that the FBI is still looking into that on their investigation.
Ms. Cheadle, you said that the buck stops with me, and I agree. I don't think you should resign. I think you should have been fired. Ma'am, you are a DEI horror story. I've told my daughter multiple times, my wife and my daughter, we talk to her all the time about how she's going to succeed in life. She'll succeed in life by achieving. Ma'am, you have not achieved today. You've let the American public down. If it was up to me, you'd be gone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheadle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much. In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement.